Good afternoon. 4 years ago, Maryland launched an audit into practices of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. It's the agency that determines the cause and manner of death in certain cases where the opinion of a medical professional is required. Their difficult work helps inform legal proceedings, and it lends clarity to the families of those who have lost a loved one, including those whose death occurred under unexplained or suspicious circumstances. The audit was designed to study the accuracy and the integrity and the precision of determinations made by the Chief Medical Examiner's Office in the state of Maryland. Dr. Jeff Kukuka from Towson University led the independent audit team. They studied 17 years of these case files from 2003 to 2019. And the team examined 87 cases in which an individual died after being restrained in custody. Dr. Kukuka's team compared their independent analysis of these cases against the determination made by the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And this audit is the first of its kind in the nation. It has set the standard for what this type of investigation can and what this type of investigation should look like. And this team worked with sound methodology. They took a deliberative approach. They relied on a thorough review process that emphasized objectivity at every single stage. This had to be done the right way, without prejudice, without ulterior motive, without any hidden agenda. That's what this moment and this work required, and that is exactly what this team delivered. In a few moments, you'll hear from both Dr. Kukuka and Attorney General Brown about what the audit revealed, but I do want to say at the top, the findings of this audit are deeply concerning. Now, it's going to take time to digest a report prepared over the course of 4 years and 2 different administrations. But if there's one takeaway that we've already drawn at this very early stage, it is this. We have to make sure we are continuing to make Maryland a model for public safety and transparency and equal justice under the law, and one is not more important than the other. Now, I do want people to hear me loud and clear. This is not an attack on the many remarkable people in law enforcement. This is about the need to initiate a thorough and systemic review that will help us to create a more just and transparent system. Later in the program, I will discuss the actions that our administration is taking in response to the completion of this audit. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney General Brown to discuss some of the results, and then after, we'll hear from Dr. Kukuka. General Brown.
Thank you, Governor. Let me at the top say that after the presentation by Dr. Kukuka, my presentation, and further remarks by the Governor, we will take questions, and the questions should be limited to the audit and the executive actions that the Governor announces. If there are medical questions, those should be referred to the Maryland Department of Health. So again, good afternoon. The Governor and I are here today, as he mentioned, to announce the results of an audit led by the Office of the Attorney General in consultation with the Governor's office, and I want to commend his team in the Office of Legal Counsel for their work. And it started under our predecessors 4 years ago. And we're also going to, as the Governor mentioned, discuss the actions to be taken or next steps. This audit began after Dr. David Fowler, then Maryland's Chief Medical Examiner in the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, I'll refer to that as OCME, provided testimony in the murder trial of Derek Chauvin. Dr. Fowler's testimony raised profound concerns within the medical community about the independence and objectivity of death determinations made by the OCME. After Dr. Fowler's testimony in 2021, more than 450 medical professionals signed a letter asking Attorney General Frosch to review the death determinations that the OCME issued when Dr. Fowler led the agency. These members of the medical community were concerned that our state's death determination had been tainted by racial or pro-law enforcement bias or were otherwise inconsistent with the standard practices for investigating and certifying in-custody deaths. After completing the audit that we are releasing today, an audit conducted in accordance with the highest standards of professionalism, objectivity, and integrity, we can say, as the governor mentioned, there are profound concerns, and they are well-founded in the audit. The audit design team of forensic pathologists and social scientists appointed in September of 2021 started by assessing more than 1,300 deaths that were examined by the OCME during Dr. Fowler's tenure from 2003 to 2019. In each of these cases, a person had died when they were in law enforcement custody. In 2023, Governor Moore and I took office and assumed oversight of the audit. Between September of 2022 and March of 2024, the audit team narrowed the cases under review from 1,300 to 87 decedents in multiple counties who died suddenly or unexpectedly around the time they were restrained, often by the police. Our office then hired 12 forensic pathologists. Between August and December of 2024, each of the 87 cases were reviewed by panels of 3 different experts. The audit design team completed their work this year and wrote the final report and recommendation that we are sharing today. The audit report's findings reveal significant discrepancies that demand our attention and response. They suggest medical examiners persistently misclassified restraint-related homicides that occurred in police custody. In 36 of the 87 cases, our expert panel unanimously determined that deaths were homicides where the OCME had previously concluded they were either undetermined, accidental, or natural. In another 5 cases, 2 of 3 independent reviewers determined that the death should have been classified as a homicide. These 41 combined cases show a failure to apply the standard practices of certifying homicides and reveal patterns that are consistent with the possibility of both racial bias and pro-police bias. Our researchers determined that OCME was especially unlikely to classify a death as a homicide if the decedent was black or if they died after being restrained by police. These findings have profound implications across our justice system. They speak to systemic issues rather than individual conduct. We recognize both the gravity of these findings for affected families and communities and the importance of surrounding law enforcement or supporting law enforcement officers who navigate difficult situations while upholding their duty to protect Marylanders. And I want to be clear, labeling a death a homicide by the OCME means a decedent died because of another person's action. It does not mean those actions rose to the level of criminal liability or culpability for those involved in the decedent's death. It does not mean the officers involved can or should be prosecuted. But it does mean the Office of the Attorney General will do whatever is necessary to help the families of those who have lost loved ones get the answers and justice that they deserve. That's why I'm announcing that starting today, the Office of the Attorney General has launched a hotline that families can write to or call for additional information if they believe their loved one is impacted by this audit. To any Marylander grieving someone who is mentioned in our report, we are here for you and we support you. These findings are troubling, but this report does not suggest intentional or malicious conduct on the part of any Maryland medical examiner. Implicit biases run throughout our system of justice, not just in Maryland, but across the United States. Throughout our country, there are racial disparities in arrests, in convictions, and sentencing. We are the first state, as the governor mentioned, the first state in the country to conduct this type of audit. That's because here in Maryland, we're not afraid to examine the ways racial bias makes our justice system less just. That's because here in Maryland, we're not afraid to examine our past to improve how we do things going forward. This report will be presented tomorrow to the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and other states will be encouraged to perform their own investigations. These audits provide an opportunity not only for justice for those whose loved ones died in police custody, but also pave the way for meaningful change. Based on these findings, we are committed to implementing comprehensive reforms on how medical examinations are conducted, reviewed, and certified, particularly in cases involving police restraint. We will establish guidelines, enhance oversight mechanisms, and training that address implicit bias. And these steps will help ensure that scientific objectivity and human dignity remain at the center of death investigations in Maryland. I want to thank our case manager, who's going to speak next, Dr. Jeff Kakuka, for managing the case reviews. It was an overwhelming task, which you handled superbly. I want to thank the audit design team, Dr. Bill Thompson, Dr. Alfredo Walker, Dr. Michael Freeman, and Dr. Deborah Davis for their tireless commitment to designing the OCM audit and drafting the report. I want to thank the OAG team, Carolyn Quattrocchi, Carrie Williams, Zanita Hurley. Thank you very much for your leadership on this. Tiffany Diamo and Anissa Mahmood, who supported OCME's work. And again, thank you to our partners in the Governor's Office of Legal Counsel, especially Amanda LaForge and Jessica Williams. And of course, Governor, thank you. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your leadership, without which we would not have gotten this 4-year undertaking across the finish line in terms of the audit and its recommendations. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Kakuka.
Thank you, A.G. Brown. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Jeff Kakuka. I am a professor of psychology and a decision scientist who served as case manager for this audit, meaning I was primarily responsible for the data collection and analysis and for drafting much of our written report. I was also a member of the audit design team, which brought together distinguished international experts in forensic medicine, social science, and research methodology to carefully design a rigorous procedure for this first-of-its-kind audit. Today, it is my pleasure to share more detail about our audit procedure and findings. The 87 cases included in the audit were all cases in which a person died while or soon after being restrained, typically by police. Between 2003 and 2019, the period during which Dr. Fowler served as OCME's chief medical examiner. The 87 audit cases included at least one case from 12 of Maryland's 23 counties, as well as 22 cases from Baltimore City. Nearly all of the 87 individuals who died in these cases were men, and nearly 3/4 were people of color. To review the cases, we recruited and thoroughly vetted a panel of 12 highly experienced, board-certified forensic pathologists to whom we are very grateful. Each case was reviewed by a randomly chosen 3 of those 12 independent reviewers. To ensure the integrity of their reviews, we redacted all sensitive or potentially biasing information from the case files, such as the identity of the decedent, the identities of OCME staff, and OCME's original determinations of cause and manner of death. Also, to examine the possibility of racial bias in OCME's determinations, reviewers made their judgments without knowing the decedent's race, and they could then revise those judgments after seeing the decedent's body, although they rarely did. The main goal of the audit was to gauge the appropriateness of OCME's determinations by comparing them against independent reviewers' unanimous judgments of those same cases. Overall, of the 87 audit cases, there were 44 cases, just over half, for which reviewers unanimously disagreed with OCME's manner of death determination. As A.G. Brown mentioned earlier, those disagreements included 36 deaths that OCME had certified as either accidental, natural, or undetermined, but that all three reviewers unanimously believed should have been classified as homicides. Those discrepancies suggest that OCME's practices during the audit's time frame were out of step with national standards for death certification, namely the but-for standard, which states that any death resulting from the actions of another person, regardless of that person's intent, should be classified as a homicide. As a result, it appears that OCME undercounted restraint-related homicides during the audit's time frame. And we also found that they undercounted homicides even more in cases where the decedent was black or was restrained by police, which raises the possibility of racial and pro-police bias. However, these findings come with two important caveats. First, the retrospective nature of the audit makes it impossible to know whether racial or pro-police biases truly affected OCME's determinations. Those disparities could instead reflect factors other than bias, which is something we make very clear in our report. Second, I will again stress that a homicide determination does not necessarily imply criminal wrongdoing or liability on the part of the individuals who applied restraint in these cases. Even so, the audit findings reveal areas for improvement in both policing and death investigation practices. And our report concludes with a list of concrete recommendations to reduce preventable deaths, promote social justice, and maximize the quality of death investigations in Maryland. Blazing new trails is never easy, but someone has to lead the way. And we believe that Maryland can and will be that leader in terms of strengthening death investigations across the country. We hope that our rigorous audit procedure will provide a blueprint for other states to conduct similar audits, and that implementing our recommendations will establish Maryland's OCME as a gold standard to which other agencies can aspire. In closing, I'd like to quickly thank Governor Moore, Attorney General Brown, and all of their staff for their support throughout this complex process. And with that, I will turn it back to Governor Moore for some important announcements.
I want to once again thank Dr. Kukuka and General Brown for their comments, for their partnership, for their leadership, and for the remarkable teams that you also both have assembled. This work is not easy, but we are in it together, and we're grateful. Before I open up to questions, I'd also like to discuss what the Moore-Miller administration is doing to carry this work forward. Just a few moments ago, I signed an executive order to further cement Maryland as a national leader in accountability and action. There are three elements that I want to highlight for you this afternoon. The first, I'm directing the Attorney General to work with states' attorneys to review each case included in this audit and determine if it should be reopened for investigation. The second, I'm directing the Maryland Department of Health to review the recommendations of this audit and to conduct a thorough analysis on implementing these recommendations. In addition, the Department of Health will work with the Medical Examiner's Office to ensure that we stay in line with national best practices and national best standards. And both the Maryland Department of Health and the Office of the Medical Examiner will deliver a report dealing their progress by December 31st of next year. Third, I'm creating a new Maryland Task Force on in-custody restraint-related death investigations. This task force will be the headquarters of our work to reduce the risk of in-custody restraint-related deaths going forward. And just as we've done for every major action that we've taken on public safety and law enforcement, We intend and we will bring everybody to the table. Our new task force will include the following individuals: government officials, including representatives from the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner and the Maryland Department of Health, legal professionals, law enforcement, the community and victims advocates, and experts in forensic pathology. In this moment, even in a very, very difficult topic, Maryland is going to take action. These steps outlined in this executive order result from careful and impartial analysis on what exactly is the best path forward. Maryland was the first state in the nation to launch a comprehensive audit on the Office of Chief Medical Examiner, and today we are proud that also will become the first state in the nation to respond to such an audit with swift and targeted action. And I hope that our work will inspire others around the country to take similar steps as we work together to strengthen our system of justice. I do also want to be very clear that this is not an easy topic, that these are not easy conversations. The pain that these families are feeling, it is real. And for many, this is years in the making, some of whom have been screaming for this type of analysis and have been met with silence. We're talking about Marylanders who have lost their lives. We're talking about families that are still grieving. We're talking about members of law enforcement who watch over our people every single day and who are some of the bravest men and women who I know. We still have a lot to process from this report. And I'm not sure if that processing of what this report unveils will ever be fully settled, honestly. But I know this is the start of the conversation and not the end of it. And I hope we can all agree on this, that in Maryland, we will always bring everyone to the table to address the most serious challenges of our time. We do not shy away from the big problems or the big questions. We face them head on. And in Maryland, we will always focus on policies that make us safer and move us closer to the promise of equal justice under law, and you cannot have one without the other. And in Maryland, we will always ensure that law enforcement has the support that they need to get the job done and to keep us safe. This audit represents a snapshot of the past, while this methodological study helps us to inform our work and the future that will be of our making. It's a future that we're building together in partnership. We will continue working closely with our state's attorneys and our public defenders. We'll continue working with our elected leaders and our local activists and advocates. We will continue working with our police officers and the communities that they protect. And again, I cannot say thank you enough to Dr. Kukuka and the Attorney General for your leadership on some really hard topics, and to your team for making today so remarkable and remarkably important. And also, I just want to say thank you to my team, who I know have worked exhaustively to make sure that justice is served. With that, we'll open up to any questions.
I know that you said that this audit isn't an indictment on anyone in the OCMEA office. However, and I know Dr. Fowler is no longer with the office. Will the state pursue any action? This is a pretty severe oversight.
Yeah, I mean, the actions that we're going to take, as announced by the governor, we are going to look at these 41 cases. We're going to review them. We'll do it in consultation with and partnership with state's attorneys to determine whether or not any of them need to be reopened for investigation. Again, there's no suggestion that anyone is criminally culpable. but it's our responsibility to go through these files beyond the OCME report, beyond the medical and the original forensic examination. We'll look at the entire file, which means engaging law enforcement as well, to make determination what are the next step. Is there criminal liability or not? So those are the actions that we're focused on based on the findings of this audit.
Is there any, to follow up on that same point, in terms of the next steps forward, I know you can't prejudge what would happen in terms of criminal liability. Many of these families have been waiting for years. Can you talk about your outreach to them and your expectation setting for them? Are you concerned that some may have false hopes that a homicide classification could lead to accountability that may or may not happen?
So I want to thank my team because we have reached out to the 41 families that we've been discussing today. We've made contact with more than half, and we continue in that effort. Again, that's why I announced the hotline and asked those who have not been reached or are interested in this issue and believe that perhaps their family could be or should be included in this to reach out to us. We are going to use all the resources in the Office of the Attorney General. I have victim witness coordinators and support. We have been clear with the families. We briefed them prior to this press conference. We gave them a similar briefing. In fact, Dr. Kukuka gave the briefing, and I had members of my team there to explain to them not only what was found, but to really emphasize, to manage those expectations, that a homicide determination by the OCME or by this audit team, okay, does not mean criminal liability or culpability. What we assured them of is that we will look at these cases to ensure that justice is done, and that we will certainly report back to them and the public on our findings.
Do any of the additional cases outside of the 87 that you examined, any of those additional cases of in-custody deaths, do any of them warrant additional examinations, additional investigation, and are there any plans to delve into some of those as well?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Dr. Kukuka to better define or describe what is outside of that 87, so you'll have a better understanding.
Thank you. The short answer is no. We have no intention at the moment of looking at cases outside of the 87. Let me briefly explain how we identified the 87 cases that were included in the audit. We requested from OCME, and they graciously provided a list of over 1,300 in-custody deaths that they investigated during Dr. Fowler's tenure. We then perused that list and identified cases in which it appeared that restraint may have played a role in the death. We requested the complete case files for those cases from OCME, which they, again, graciously provided us with everything they have, including photographic documentation and video where appropriate. We then scrutinized those case files to ensure that they involved sudden or unexpected deaths that occurred during or soon after the application of restraint. Those were our inclusion criteria. That's how we identified those 87. So those are what we focused on.
So outside of restraint, so restraint was there's no way that there could be a homicide determination for any of those other...
I can't speak to that, but we focused on cases involving restraint specifically.
Let me jump in here for a second.
Sure, please.
Also, just a reminder of the historical context, right? April of 2021, Derek Chauvin is convicted of murder in the death of George Floyd, and we all saw that on TV. And it involved police restraint by Derek Chauvin, and Dr. Fowler testified to a death determination around excited delirium. So it was the 450 members of the medical community as well as the world that saw that testimony and gasped. And you didn't have to be a medical professional, right, to be in disbelief of that testimony. But that's what caused us, in response to the letter from the medical profession, to focus on those types of cases.
How many of the 41 cases were under Dr. Fowler?
Who's managing?
I'm managing. Let's take here in the front here, and then we'll go to you, sir.
Sorry.
Thank you.
How many of the 41 cases were under Dr. Fowler's tenure?
All of them.
All of them?
Yeah. 1,300 we looked at initially under Dr. Fowler's tenure, 2003, 2019, 1,300, down to 87, all under Dr. Fowler's tenure.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
How is the new task force any different investigations that you guys already did, and won't the task force be doing the same thing that you've already done?
So the task force is going to be much more sort of comprehensive. The audit looked at the autopsies themselves, right? And all the material, forensic, to make a determination. That's what they focused on. The task force is going to widen the aperture, right? Because when you think about it, what is the reason for an autopsy? The core primary reason is to identify, as Dr. Kukuka mentioned, preventable deaths, okay? So we start with that, but then we look at larger issues around, the task force would very well look at training for law enforcement on issues around restraint, how to provide information to the medical examiner's office to make sure it's full and complete. So when the medical examiner is doing the autopsy, they've got the information they need. So it's going to be a lot broader than just the autopsy review.
It's a question about how you go forward with this now. Obviously, the standard for determining what you determine may be different than a criminal determination of evidence. It's a different evidentiary standard. What tools will be available to you as you pursue this now? DNA, or you have to exhume these victims? Where do you go with this? What do you have to do?
This is not unlike cases where, after the fact, you go back and review all the evidence that's available, right? So we're looking at the autopsy. We're going to work with state's attorneys. We're going to engage local law enforcement, right? Look at the interviews that they may have taken, the police reports. And from that, we do what any investigator does. You follow the leads. You follow the facts. If there are other witnesses to interview, if there's other physical evidence that is still in the custody of local law enforcement, we'll review that. The same type of investigation that happens anytime you look at a case after the fact, right? So it may be an initial investigation in some of these cases, and I don't know, right? Or it may be a reinvestigation, and it may be no investigation at all, in that we will review the information we have. Some cases may be clear, okay, that there is no criminal culpability. Other cases may require a little bit more digging. Others may require even more.
So this looks back in time. Can people now trust that when these things happen, that it is being handled without such bias and honestly? This looks back at a snapshot of time, someone that no longer works there. Do you think the problem still exists?
Well, I think even just the time that we've been in these seats, there's already been substantial movement, momentum, and improvements at LCME. In addition to having new leadership there, new accountability measures and new structures. And so we're very clear about that time period, and we'll continue doing an examination and bringing justice to what happened during that time period. But from our first moments in these offices, we've already moved to make improvements in OCME, and while those improvements will continue, we also know that the adjustments that have been made have been important and necessary.
Do you believe that these were intentional findings? Was this a cover-up by the medical examiner's office for this period of time?
No, there's no indication. I think it's important. I want to let Dr. Kukuka speak to this. You know, there's an evolution in the science, right? And just so that everyone knows, you've got a JD, a PhD, and a Rhodes Scholar, but there's no MD up here, right? Now, there's an evolution in the science, okay? And different OCMEs across the country use different practices, right? And over time, there's been an effort by the various professional associations to bring uniformity. I think when you speak with most medical examiners, like the public, they'll say accuracy is important, but consistency is paramount. So there's a move in this profession towards consistency as well as accuracy. And there has been an evolution in OCME, and I want Dr. Kukuka to speak to a pretty major significant development in OCME.
Absolutely. Thank you, A.G. Brown. As the Attorney General mentioned, death investigation, as with any field of science, naturally continues to evolve over time as we learn more, right? And many of our recommendations in our report are not only aimed at making sure that OCME is compliant with national standards, but also making sure that their practices are compliant with the most up-to-date scientific understanding in their field, particularly the dangers of prone weighted restraint, as well as the now discredited concept of excited delirium, which has been the subject of some controversy. It's important to keep in mind, as has been alluded to numerous times, that this audit is looking at a particular historical snapshot, right? The most recent case that was included in this audit was investigated almost 6 years ago, and there has been progress since then. Almost half of the cases in this audit invoked the now discredited concept of excited delirium, which had not been discredited at the time. But since that time, it's been disavowed by numerous medical organizations, including the American Medical Association and the National Association of Medical Examiners. And for that reason, OCME has likewise disavowed that, that terminology.
Are you releasing the report, and will that have details of each individual case?
The only details of each individual case that would be provided in the report are the original manner of death, the OCME's determination, that is, as well as the reviewer's consensus opinion, if applicable.
Will the person's identity be?
Yes. Yes. Appendix B of the report.
And the report is out. Just first, last question, please. Any more? Okay.
I have a question about this and then an off-topic question. About this, working with the state's attorney's offices, have you had any conversations with them about, moving forward? Are they on board with this as well?
Yeah, we've had a number of conversations with the state's attorney's office. I think they appreciate the need to ensure that Maryland's system of justice and all the affiliated systems like the OCME and offices and activities that support that, transparency and accountability are important, and we should continue and always look to ways to improve it. And we've also had a conversation about the need to work together, right, under the governor's executive order as we review these cases. As to their opinion about it, I would just ask that you speak to the state's attorneys and they can offer their opinions on an assessment of this.
And then Governor Moore, just a quick question for you. Looking at some of the other issues in terms of crime, juvenile crime specifically, I can ask about, we had a 16-year-old involved in a fatal crash, in Howard County, and your office said that that was an isolated incident. We know that instances involving juvenile violence really is not an isolated incident. We've had people ask, when is the governor's office going to take action? So what do you say to them?
I'd say I don't speak towards individual cases. I think individual cases and individual investigations are exactly that. So it's not appropriate for me to speak towards that. I would also say that I don't think anyone can look at the work this administration has done since day one and say that we do not take public safety as our number one priority. I think if you're looking at the fact that Maryland is amongst the nation's leaders in drops in violent crime, if you look at the fact that Maryland is amongst the nation's leaders in drops in everything from auto theft and juvenile crimes, et cetera, like where we literally went 8 straight years of 300 plus homicides in Baltimore City. We went 8 straight years of watching the homicide rate nearly double in the state of Maryland. The non-fatal shooting rate did double in the state of Maryland, and the progress that we have seen across the state of Maryland in the past 2.5 years has been absolutely staggering. It's been the necessity of a lot of groups to be involved in that, to include local law enforcement, to include our state's attorneys, to include our public defenders, to include the Office of the Attorney General, to include our state, to include community groups, to include city halls and county executive rooms all across the state of Maryland. And while we know that we still have more work to do, we're incredibly proud of the progress that we've continued to make, both in terms of juveniles and adults, to understand and underscore the fact that we demand and we expect for our communities to be safe. Thank you so much.
Another question. The bond rating came out. We haven't had a chance to ask you about that because of the earlier.
Sorry,
the bond rating.
oh yeah.
DC has gone through this as well.
They did.
Your office described it as a Trump bond rating. Why did you feel it was necessary to get that message out?
Well, I think it is. It's a slight regional downgrade because you're absolutely right. Washington D.C. just went through the same thing, and the irony is, if you look at the language in the report, they are very similar. That the proximity to Washington D.C. And what is happening with these arbitrary and in some cases illegal federal layoffs, it is having impacts to economies that are closely tied in line in Washington, D.C., and it's the reason that we've had such a push on making sure we're emphasizing economic growth. It's the reason we've had a push on ensuring that we are diversifying our economy off of Washington, D.C. If you look at what happened in this last budget alone, we have around $2.5 billion worth of cuts. It's the largest amount of cuts that a Maryland budget has had in 16 years, that we turn a structural deficit into a surplus, that we have 8% within our rainy day fund, which is above the recommended amount, that we are finally watching economic activity grow in the state of Maryland. New business starts are actually up in the state of Maryland, that we're seeing our unemployment rate is amongst the lowest unemployment rates in the entire country. We have added more jobs in the first 2 years of this administration than the previous administration added in 8. So we're very proud of the progress that we've continued to make, but it is just, and while we have disagreements with some of the methodology that Moody's might have selected, and maybe some of the others might think differently from Moody's as well, to be honest, it is very clear that the impact of the Trump administration, that the impact it is having on the D.C. region and on Maryland, by extension, is real and it is severe. But I know that even in this moment of economic crisis that the White House in Washington is inspiring, that the progress that we're making in the state of Maryland, despite that, is important, and we will continue making that progress, making sure we can have balanced budgets and still give a tax cut to middle-class families. That is our priority.
Does the state take any responsibility for the downgrade, though?